Hey everybody, welcome to weekend one of the Weekend Woodworker. We're gonna kick off the course exploring the California casual style of furniture design with this patio side table. The essence of California casual is laid back, simple, and fun. I coined this term as a way to validate and give meaning to a style rooted in a DIY aesthetic that began to emerge in the 2010s. California casual features simple but sturdy construction and is often assembled with visible fasteners or exposed pocket screws. Pieces are usually made from inexpensive pine boards or plywood, kind of unapologetically breaking with woodworking tradition. California casual furniture is rarely stained, but always has a clear protective finish, or they're often distinguished by their bright, whimsical colors, especially for outdoor furniture. It's a style meant to make a happy statement that really delights visitors. As with any project, feel free to make it your own by adding or removing elements or changing the size to fit your needs. I've made two versions of this table with a couple of options for you to consider. While this bright blue is quintessential California casual, you may want something a little less bold. The second table hides the fasteners and incorporates some faux dowel joinery. I applied a clear protective finish that retains the natural look of the pine boards. Each table features decorative bevels on the top slats and picket fence miters on the legs. And each table has an inset lower shelf for storing poolside treats, books, or maybe toys. You're definitely going to learn a lot about your miter saw on this project. Good morning. Hope you're ready to start building. One of my goals with the Weekend Woodworker course is not that you learn how to build a table or learn how to build a bookcase, but that you learn how to build. It's really one of the coolest parts about woodworking, that every project is unique, but you don't have to learn how to build each one. As long as you understand the basics of building, you'll be able to build anything you want. It comes mostly down to deciding how you're going to approach a specific project. It's a mental process that you'll learn through experience and just time. The more stuff you build, the better you'll get at figuring out how to build stuff. As you gain experience, each project you build will be more about strategizing and problem solving and how to apply the basic skills that you've learned. The first thing we're gonna do is cut all of the legs and the frame pieces at the same time using the miter saw. We'll cut the decorative miters on the ends of the legs, and then we'll build the two leg assemblies and connect them together. We'll cut all the slats for the lower shelf to size and glue them in place. Then we'll cut out the top slats, cut decorative bevels on their ends, and attach them to the frame. Finally, there's gonna be a lot of sanding to do before we complete the project with paint or a clear finish. First thing I want to do is screw this scrap board to my miter saw and make an extension fence for my stop block. If you built the basic mobile workbench, you're already familiar with this setup. From that split in the fence, I can measure the length of the legs and make a mark on my extension fence. I'll use my combination square to draw a line. Just double check to make sure that's correct. I'll clamp a scrap of wood to meet up with that line. I'll use these 1x3s for the legs, and since I'm gonna be making a pair of these tables, I'll cut out 8 of these. I always like to cut a little bit off the ends of the boards to square them up before I cut them to their final length. Now I can just butt this board up against that stop block and start making cuts. Now I don't have to measure every piece and know that all the legs will be the same length. I want to point out a couple of things on the ends of the boards to look out for and why I like to cut these off. First, if they have any of these tags stapled to the ends of the board, you want to remove those. You don't want your saw running into that metal. Here's an example of a really poorly cut into a board. You definitely want to square that up. If any of the boards have a knot on the end like this one, there'll usually be a split also associated with that. So it's a good idea just to cut all of that off. To further simplify this first project, I've designed it so that all of the frame pieces are the same length, so I can cut out all of these cross pieces without having to adjust the stop block. So each table will need 4 1x3 cross pieces and 4 1x2 cross pieces. Always be on the lookout for boards that are just excessively warped. This half of the board, it's really crooked and not worth using. Don't be afraid to use your miter saw left-handed. Sometimes it's just easier to make cuts that way. By the way, whenever I'm working with inexpensive pine boards, I almost always cut an extra piece or two just to give me a little peace of mind, a little extra insurance in case I screw something up somewhere along the line. There's 4 1x2 cross braces on each table. I'll cut 8 since I'm making 2 tables. If you want to save a little time, you can cut 2 boards at once. So those are all the pieces I'm going to need to build the framework for each of the tables. I'll cut the slats for the top and the lower shelf after this is all assembled. I'll remove this extension fence so that I can cut out the miters for the bottoms of the table legs. Whenever you need to make multiple pieces of a project all exactly the same, it's always better to set up some sort of a jig that'll let you repeat those cuts over and over rather than trying to measure each one out. It'll give you much more accurate results and it'll save you a lot of time. That's exactly what I'm going to do to make this shape on the bottom of the legs. I'll measure up 3/4 of an inch from the end and make a mark. Now with my combination square, I can make a line straight across. And then using this 45-degree angle, I can connect the end of that line to wherever it goes. I'll show you. And same on the other side. Really, you only need to do one side though. So these are the 2 waste pieces that I'll need to cut off. Over on my miter saw, I'll adjust the head to a 45-degree miter. Now I want to line up my saw to where it's going to make a cut right along the edge of that cut line. I'll line it up with the left side of my blade. I'll take this scrap board and line it up against the end of that board and clamp it down. And I'll double check to make sure that it's going to cut on that line. Looks good. Now I can make my first cut. This will go through the workpiece and the stop block. Now I'll be able to make these cuts on every single board. One of the things I want you to start training yourself to do is thinking about options for completing tasks. I have a couple of pieces of advice that might help. A jig is a specially constructed piece to help you build something else. Jigs are often project specific and not used again. A simple example would be the stop block I set up to make these shapes at the bottoms of the legs. Whenever possible, try to set up a jig when you have to make more than one of something. The simplest solutions are always the best. Try to boil down your options to the basics. The more you build things, the better you'll get at anticipating potential problems, and the better you'll get at finding simpler solutions based on your experience. These legs are a good example. Each assembly needs to not only be square with itself, but it needs to match the opposite assembly. Your first thought might be to simply line up the ends of the cross braces with the ends of the legs and kind of feel with your fingers until they feel flush. Well, assuming your ends and edges are perfectly square, that might get you close, but holding them in place while you glue or screw them would be tricky, and chances are the legs would be off just enough not to match up. You might consider using a combination square, but it's pretty small, and a framing square is kind of awkward to use precisely, and squaring up 4 legs would just be a pain. But you're moving in the right direction thinking of a square. So what if we made a big square that we didn't have to set up each time? A couple of straight 2x4s might work perfectly. Of course, you want to make sure that your 2x4s are good and straight. With one board screwed in place, I'll use my framing square against the inside of another 2x4 until it's straight. And I'll clamp it in place. And quickly double check that it hasn't moved. Looks good. I designed this table so that the cross pieces holding it together are going to be visible from the outside of the table. So you've got a choice to make whether you want to install the screws from this side through the cross piece or from the back side through the leg into the cross piece. I'll show you both methods, plus how you can make it extra fancy using a dowel. The only other consideration is how to square up this lower cross piece since it's not part of my 2x4 square. I could just measure the distance on this side and make a mark, measure a distance on this side, make a mark, and try to line them up. But that's gonna be a whole lot of measuring, and whenever possible, I try to avoid measuring things. So instead, I'm gonna make a couple of spacers. This way, I only need to take one measurement to set up a stop block on my miter saw. With the blade locked in its down position, I can measure from the side of the blade and clamp down a scrap of wood to the fence. That measurement doesn't have to be exact. Just set it up to whatever depth you want that lower shelf to be on your table. I'll cut 2 equal lengths out of this scrap board. Now squaring up that lower cross piece is gonna be easy. I'm gonna assemble this with glue and screws, but I wanna make sure I drill pilot holes before I drive every screw. Let me show you why. First, I'll drive a screw with no pilot hole in the wood. The screw literally forces the fibers of the wood apart, causing a split. Now let's try drilling a hole first. I'm using a drill bit that's slightly narrower than the shank of the screw. And I'll drive the screw in. Maybe with the exception of larger construction projects made out of 2x4s like my workbench, always get in the habit of drilling a hole before driving a screw. It's especially important towards the ends of boards. Quick side note, almost every mistake in woodworking is fixable. If you do split a piece of wood, you don't need to throw it away. Just remove the screw, put some wood glue in that split, clamp it together, and once it's dry, you'll be good to go. Okay, let's put these things together now. First, start out with 2 of the legs and take one of them and just square it up against that 2x4 and this 2x4. Take the top cross piece, this is the 1x2, and you'll line it up also square in this corner. This leg over here is just kind of used to help balance it. And I'll put a little bit of glue on this side. Use a couple of clamps to keep these boards from moving while you drive the screws in. They don't have to be really tight, just enough to hold it in place. I don't need the drill bit to go through both of these boards all the way into my workbench, so I'm gonna raise it up just a little bit and I'm gonna flag that spot with a piece of masking tape. I'll drill 2 holes staggered, stopping when I reach that flag. I'll use my impact driver to drive the screws in place. Keep in mind, it's really the glue that's providing the strength to any woodworking project. The glue is stronger than the wood, and it's going to be stronger than any mechanical fasteners. The advantage to using glue and the screws is that I can glue it and I don't have to wait for the glue to dry before I can move on to my next side. Now I'll just flip this around to do the other leg. This time I'll rest this edge of the leg up against this board. Now I can install this cross piece for the lower shelf using those spacers. I'll butt the spacers up into these corners and put glue on both ends this time. And this will sit in here just like this. This will keep it perfectly level on both sides. And 2 screws here too. Here, I just want to make sure that it feels flush on that side. And remove the spacers. And there's one leg assembly. Once you've got this system worked out with the jig in place, it's so easy to put these together, you might as well make a pair of tables. Or go into full-scale production mode. These little tables sell really well and they've got a great profit margin. There we go. There's 2 leg assemblies for 1 table. I can double check to make sure that they're equal. Okay, I'll set these 2 aside and get started on the extra fancy method. Basically the same routine, only this time I'm gonna have the cross brace on the bottom. I'll use this one for some support, and then these will go on the top. good. And I'll put these spacers underneath this time. So you can stop there if you like, but if you want to make the fancy looking dowel pins, you'll need a 1/2 inch dowel rod and a 1/2 inch drill bit. What you'll do is just flip this around this way. Here again, flag the 1/2 inch drill bit so it doesn't go all the way through. Just set it against your workbench and raise it up just a little. Now over here at my miter saw, I want to cut this dowel into short pieces. I want them to be just a little bit longer than the depth that I made those holes. I don't usually like to use a stop block to cut dowels like this because they're so small. Sometimes this little piece gets trapped between the blade and the stop block and ends up shooting out at weird angles. And since these dowels don't have to be any exact size, they don't all need to match, I'm just gonna mark the fence with a piece of tape. I'll glue these into those holes. There's a couple of ways to trim off the excess of those dowels. You could use a Japanese flush trim saw like this one, or a much more inexpensive way is to use a hacksaw blade. Cut it down as close as you can to the surface of the board. It doesn't have to be perfect because you're gonna sand this later and smooth it out. So while the Japanese flush trim saw cuts a lot faster, unless you're making a lot of these, there's really no reason to buy one. It's a good idea to do some sanding now, especially on these ends if they're not exactly flush. Get those nice and even so that the cross pieces will fit nicely. It's going to be a little bit tricky to attach these side pieces. I think what I'm going to do is clamp this down to the 2x4. I want this fairly close to the edge so that I have room for my drill. The important part here is that this side is flush. This is the top of the table. I want the screws to go into this board, not the end grain of that board. Again, screwing into this end grain isn't a strong connection, so make sure you screw into the edge of this board. Now I need to do the same thing on this side. I think it's gonna be a lot easier if I just slide it over here. I'll remove this 2x4. Almost there. Now I just have to figure out how to put this piece on. Okay, I think this is the best way to do it. It'll be upside down. I'll clamp this piece to my 2x4. I guess I better put the glue on all 4 connections now. I'll clamp this into place. Okay, with both of those framed out, it seems like a good place to call it a day. Get plenty of rest and I'll see you back in the shop tomorrow morning.